Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully, more people will trickle in as we continue. But my name is Jasmine Colvin. I am the Director of Civic Leadership Engagement at Houstonians for Great Public Schools. Thank you all for joining our webinar today. We're going to be talking about one of the most critical elements that impacts students, parents, teachers, community members, everyone that has a stake in what's going on in public education. So in our time today, we'll kind of walk through some key components that has to do with budgeting in the education space, and then we'll finish with giving you all an opportunity to act as school board members and determine how you would balance a budget. So our time today does include a Spanish option, and so my colleagues Judith and Tino will go over how to access the interpretation services.
Buenas tardes, gracias a todos por estar con nosotros hoy. Vamos a hablar del presupuesto de nuestras escuelas y nuestro distrito. Y antes de eso, vamos a indicarles cómo acceder la interpretación. Entonces, le voy a dar el tiempo a Tino.
Okay, and before we begin, my co-hosts here are my handy dandy coalition members, and so I'll let my colleague Sandra introduce you all to a little bit of our work.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. So excited to be with you tonight. I want to share a little bit about our citywide coalition. The coalition was initiated as a result of the Citywide Issues Assembly we organized back in February of 2023. The pandemic reshaped the educational experience our students were having, and we were seeing a multitude of challenges, and we wanted to make sure to focus on issues that were top of mind for students, families, and educators. And we made a commitment by ensuring educational policy and advocacy priorities were informed by the community, especially by those that experience these challenges firsthand. So our coalition's mission is to mobilize organizations across Houston to advance the use of research-based educational policies and practices, again, that are informed by the community. And our coalition also serves as a collective that brings awareness to issues impacting education in Houston and advances an education-focused agenda with the intended purpose of ensuring all students reach their full potential. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. Again, I'm Sandra Rodriguez, and I am the Executive Director with Latinos for Education.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. So our time today, we're gonna start off talking about how public schools are funded, and then we're gonna talk about how the dollars flow, the impact on students, and then look at some implications for the 2025-2026 HISD budget, and conclude with our activity, giving you all a chance to weigh in on how you would prioritize student spending. So starting off with revenue, so how HISD receives money. As you can see from our graph here, the bulk of revenue comes from local sources. In other words, property taxes. So if you're paying property taxes, whether you are a parent or not, or whether you have children, they're just not in school yet, like myself, you are directly supporting public education. The next bucket of revenue comes from the state. And so in a few minutes on our next slide, we'll kind of go into how the funding is distributed from the state. And then lastly, the smallest bucket of funding comes from the federal government. And so what that is sometimes when you hear about Title I spending for economically disadvantaged students, or funding for students that receive special education services, or even in the past, how schools were getting that federal COVID money, that ESSER funding, that's what that bracket is speaking to. So doing a double tap on state funding. So in Texas, funding is tied to the attendance, the average daily attendance, rather than total enrollment. And so what that means is fewer students and seats equals less money for schools. And so, of course, the number one priority reason for wanting students to be at school is so that they are, keeping up, they aren't falling behind. But also one of the main reasons why you hear schools urging parents to like make sure kids come to school every day or making sure kids aren't tardy is because that is exactly that's how schools get their money from, that's how districts get their money from the state. And so, attendance coupled with enrollment can sometimes lead to challenges for specific schools. So let's say, a school, two different elementary schools have a 90% attendance rate, and one school has 500 kids and one school only has 100 kids. So that first school, elementary school, is going to get funding for 450 students, as opposed to the smaller school that has 90% attendance as well. They're only going to get funding for 90 students. And so attendance coupled with enrollment can kind of lead to these funding inequities for schools. And so that's why you'll see some schools have more programming or more enrichment than others, because fixed costs don't really scale when it comes to school needs. Like every school needs a principal, every school has maintenance, regardless of how many students attend or are enrolled. And so looking at things a little bit further, we can kind of look at the difference between like the district budget and the campus budget. So the district, you kind of see, is responsible for things like instruction or leadership, maintenance, or paying debt if the district has incurred any debt. And campuses are more kind of in control of staffing decisions and materials and programs and more flexible spending. And so although Houston ISD is, known for being a decentralized school district, meaning the principals have more control over their budgets, HISD, however, is in a defined or tiered autonomy system that allows campuses or principals that lead schools with a higher A through F accountability rating. They have more control or more discretion over their budget than a principal at a school that has a lower rating of a D or an F. So just kind of a hybrid system there. And then this kind of leads us furthermore into our conversation about constraints. So anyone that has done, budgeting, even in your personal home budget, you know that all dollars are not created equal, especially, in this economy. So we all have things that have to be paid. And for the school district, that looks like teacher salaries and benefits. And then you have things that are a little bit more flexible, that are different, per year, per month for schools. And that could be maybe enrichment, after school programs, maybe any type of like language programs, things that would typically attract students to want to attend a school with, a bigger gap in their budget or more limited funds. They're not able to offer the same programming as a school with more resources. And so thinking about that, and then also including just the impact of, you know, like inflation, so it costs more to kind of do the same things, materials cost more. So those are just different things that cause leaders to have to, the different constraints that leaders have to consider when they're trying to kind of balance the budget. And so ultimately, that means that everything can't be funded, every priority can't be funded. In some cases, investing in one thing may require a leader to may require a leader to, invest less in something else. Or in some cases, it may cause leaders to have to cut programs. So those are just kind of examples of how, how those trade-offs can kind of show up. And so my colleague Judith is going to go in a little bit more detail exactly about how leaders and how school board leaders specifically, how they go about prioritizing resources.
Hi, everyone. I realized I didn't introduce myself earlier and I was speaking just Spanish. I'm Judith Cruz. I'm the Assistant Director for the Houston region for Ed Trust in Texas. And great to be here again with you all tonight. So Lone Star Governance is basically a framework, a system that is designed to help school boards have priorities and keep a district kind of focused on those priorities. When you think about a school district as large as HISD or just any school system, there are a lot of priorities, there's a lot of challenges, a lot of programs, and lots of solutions. And so how are districts able to figure out how to spend their money and how to prioritize their money? And there's a lot of research around how many priorities or goals a system should have if they want to accomplish those things, right? And so in a school system, the school system is designed to be able to help students learn and achieve their potential. And so if you set goals around those student outcomes, then how many priorities should you have? How many goals should you have, right? You have thousands of students, lots of different grade levels, lots of different subjects. And so thinking about, okay, what are the things that we know will make a really big difference? So one of those is third grade reading. Lots of research pointing to third grade reading and making sure that if students are able to read by third grade, they're more likely to be successful in subsequent grades. They're more likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to have post-secondary success. So lots of different variables. So that's one example. And in Lone Star governance, based on a lot of this research, there are 3 to 5 goals that boards usually set to help drive that vision, help drive how resources are allocated in a district. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, thinking about how we allocate those resources, right? There's lots of different things that need to happen in a school district. And when you think about it, the majority of the budget is actually tied into salaries, teacher salaries, all of the other employees, leadership, bus drivers, so many different folks that help make school happen. But there's another pot of money that we're able to allocate to make sure that we achieve those goals that the board has set as part of the vision. And they're saying, okay, district, we've set these goals. These are the priorities we want to accomplish. It doesn't mean everything else is not important. It just means we've got to put our priorities here so that we can accomplish those goals. And once we accomplish these goals, then we can move on to the next set of priorities. So if you can see on the screen, third grade reading, third grade math, college and career readiness, special education, these are priorities that this board, the current HISD board, has set. And you can see where the starting point was and what the target is and the percentage of students that are on grade level, for example, right? When they started, it was 41% of students were on grade level in third grade in their ability to read. And the target at the end of 5 years is 56% of students being able to read on grade level. And you might be thinking, wow, only 56%? Well, we should have everybody reading on grade level, right? But in order to make systems change, right, it's incremental. You can't just change it all overnight. And how these resources, how the money is allocated is a really important piece of that. And like, you can't do the things that you set out to do. So if you say, okay, the board is saying, superintendent, we want you to accomplish this, but if you don't have the money or resources, it's going to be pretty difficult and pretty challenging. But if you do have the resources, then you're much more likely to accomplish your goal. And that's why it's really important to have that alignment, right? And not just say, well, we set these goals and now district, you're just going to prioritize all of the things. We really need to be able to prioritize on a few things. I'm going to drop a link in the chat that has the full language of the goals so that you can see those, and especially once you are, let's see if this works. Okay, especially as we're doing the activity in just a bit. Next slide, please. I think that's you, Jasmine, right?
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about impact and also just how to consider the impact of potential trade-offs. So, for example, let's say a district wants to invest in teacher salaries. I mean, research shows that a teacher is the most impactful variable on student outcomes. So, of course, you want to invest in teachers, and so increasing teacher salaries, it improves teacher retention. It also improves teacher recruitment. Who wouldn't be on board with that? But when you have limited funds, it makes a board member or a superintendent say, okay, well, do I want to invest in teachers and teacher salaries, or do I want to invest in college and career readiness? Especially as you consider, a lot of research right now is focused on post-secondary success, like really understanding or determining if high schools are adequately preparing students, for a life beyond college. I mean, a life beyond high school. I mean, are they able to get a house? Are they able to start a family with the wage that they're earning? And so, unfortunately, that's something that leaders have to consider. You can't fund everything. And so, these are just some examples of the conversations that we'll have to have in a bit when considering, what, we choose to invest in. And before we get started, just kind of doing a double tap on Houston ISD specifically, as they are currently engaging in their budget process for next school year. Some headwinds that they have to consider when moving forward is the big enrollment decline. I know it's a little bit small on here, but the graph is showing, that enrollment decline is not just a Houston ISD issue. These are various school districts across the Houston region. And as you see, the bulk of them are all experiencing enrollment decline. And as I mentioned earlier, we know the impact that enrollment decline has on schools and district budgets. And so the current administration is projecting an additional loss of 6,500 students for next year. Another thing to consider is just historically inefficient spending in HISD. There have been several audits, with 2024 being the most recent efficiency audit, that looked at the fact that HISD could do better as far as prioritizing where it spends money. A few anticipated tailwinds. Right now, the Texas legislative session is in full swing. And so there are a couple of school finance bills, specifically HB2 is a big school finance bill that's up right now. And although the HISD is budgeting for an anticipated increase in the state basic allotment, we really do not know. The Texas House and the Texas Senate are going back and forth about, yes, they are willing to invest in schools, but they are going back and forth about how they want to do that. And so, although they are anticipating that increase, it still really is unsure how that's going to look once things finally pan out in session. So now we're gonna go into our activity. What would you do with $100 million? And Judith's gonna give us a little bit more background information about the different roles and what actually happens during the budgeting process.
Okay, so I'm sure you're thinking, wow, $100 million, that's a ton of money. But it gets allocated very, very quickly when you think about all of the needs in schools and school districts. So when you dive into this activity, you're going to see that it's a lot harder sometimes than you think to decide how to prioritize the money and what should we spend our money on. But before we do that, let's talk about who actually controls the HISD budget, who comes up with what we should be spending our money on. A lot of times who we see is the school board, right? And the school board and the superintendent having a discussion, but think about all of the planning that goes into it, and looking at past years and how much money was spent, looking at data. So there's a lot of planning and meetings and decisions that get made before it even comes to the public. And really that means the board, right? Because the board has public meetings. So the superintendent and his team are really the people that are responsible for creating the budget, right? And so they come with recommendations to the school board. And the superintendent is also who is responsible, the superintendent and his team, who is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day and overseeing how that money is spent. So once the board approves it, And that approval always happens in June. Once the board approves it, then the board says, okay, superintendent, we approved the budget. Now it's your job to go ahead and make sure that you're spending the money in the way that we approved and spending the money in the way that is aligned to accomplishing those board goals. Receives the budget proposal, asks lots of questions to make sure that those priorities are being met, that those priorities are being aligned. And when those trade-offs happen, when those cuts are being made, making sure that they're being made based on data and based on evidence, right? Because at the end of the day, there isn't usually enough money to spend on all of the things that the school district might deem necessary. And so asking questions, how did you make that decision? How do you know that that cut is the right cut to make? How do you know that that investment is the right investment to make? So the school board aren't the ones that decide what goes in and out of the budget, but they can decide what questions they should be asking and helping challenge the organization to think, okay, are these the right investments? And they might make adjustments and then bring it back to the board before a final vote in June. And that's why you see workshops scheduled throughout the spring semester, because there are discussions that allow for the school board to ask those questions and for the district to make those adjustments if they are necessary. Principals also make budgetary decisions. And in HISD, the schools that have more autonomy, as the district describes it, they have more authority over their campus budgets. And the schools that are NES, or the new education system, they have budgets that are allocated by central office. So some principals might have more decision-making power than other principals currently in HISD. So hopefully that helps give you an overview of who's actually making these budgetary decisions. And the next slide. Is that the next slide? Okay, so we're going back to, yes, here's the board goals, and I dropped a link in the chat that has all of the language around those. So your group is going to decide how to allocate these $100 million. And we're going to give you a list of things to pick from and some amounts. And then you can decide if you want to allocate that full amount, a partial amount. You're going to have a discussion about how to prioritize, right? Based on the goals, what are the things that, if you were a decision maker, right? If you are a superintendent bringing this to the board, what are the things that you're going to say and why they should be prioritized? If you're a school board member, what are the questions you're going to be asking as to why those things should be the things that are prioritized and allocated? And I think you'll realize that it's sometimes it's some tough decisions that have to be made. It's never easy. We want to fund everything. Lots of needs, and they have needs beyond their academic needs, and districts want to be able to fund all of those, but there are also priorities that have to be met. And so how do we figure that out, right? And hopefully there's opportunity for partnerships and other things when we can't fully fund the things within the district, right? And that might be part of your conversation today. So we are going to, I think I'll stay in one group. Is that correct, Jasmine? Okay. So here's some options before we break out into our discussion. Here's some options of what you can spend it on and how much. This is the most you would be able to spend on any given piece. You can decide if you want to allocate that full amount. If it's less, you're gonna have to explain why. If it's the full amount, also explain why. So pre-K expansion, we know access to full day high quality pre-K can really make a difference in kindergarten readiness. Students enter kindergarten already behind a lot of their peers, so that high quality pre-K is so important. Can that make a difference? Is that an important priority for you all. Teacher salaries, as Jasmine mentioned, how critical that is to have high quality teachers with each of our students. Facilities upgrades. If y'all are in a school in HISD, you've seen how much need there is just to keep the AC and the heater going, let alone patching up so many other problems that we have. So is that a priority? Does that make a difference for student learning? I'm really excited to hear the discussion on this. College and career readiness. Making sure that there's college and career advisors that can help students guide through that process. If you've ever worked with high school students or have teenagers of your own, you'll realize that this is a really lengthy and just lots of different steps in the process. So having advisors that know how to navigate that is so important, especially for first generation students. Transportation, curriculum and instruction, family engagement. I won't spend more time describing those, but those are all critical pieces that we need in order to make our schools run. So how do we decide what we're going to spend it on, y'all? So I think everyone is able to join in the conversation now. So feel free to come off mute. We have the instructions. Oh, can you share that in the next page, Jasmine? So you'll review your options, you'll discuss your priorities, you'll make your selections, and then you'll be prepared to share on how you came up with those priorities. And so since we're all going to be in one group, and then on, I guess if you can show them how maybe the slide that has yeah, there we go. The budget and how we're going to add it up to 100 million. But I would love to have a discussion on what you think should be prioritized and why. And then we can kind of just take it from there and allow people to come off mute and discuss, and then we'll debrief for a few minutes after the discussion. So I would say let's take at least 10-15 minutes to discuss as a whole group what these priorities should be and kind of come to a consensus. I know that's a short amount of time. Usually decision makers would have lots more time to do this, but in the interest of time, we'll make it a shorter discussion. Anyone want to be a brave soul and take a first stab and offer up an idea of what should be invested in and why?
I will give it a stab if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say from my current experiences that bookends are the most important. That is pre-K and post-high school efforts are critical in the success of any school district. Now, as you said, everything else is important, but if we start off the students well, and if we allow the children to depart our school system well, I think would go a long way to be successful.
Okay, so making sure I heard you correctly, you're saying we should expand in pre-K, I'm sorry, invest in pre-K and invest in college and career readiness, since those are kind of like the first and the last. Do you think invest the full amounts that are proposed, which would be pre-K would be 40 million and college and career readiness would be 25 million?
So I'm actually driving. I can't actually read those.
Got it.
I don't have an answer to that question because I don't know what the other items are. But I just feel that those two things would welcome the students well and help the students move on well. I think those two things are quite important. And then, I believe that a happy parent is a happy child. Therefore, a happy teacher is a happy student. So that is one of also my priorities is to help teachers get good pay and to respect them by paying them a good wage is really important.
Okay, so in addition to the pre-K and the college and career readiness, definitely the teacher salaries.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing, Rafi. Does anyone agree, disagree with Rafi? Want to tell us, what your reasons are on these priorities? And again, this is just friendly, healthy discussion. We're not actually voting on this budget, thankfully.
I just from listening to Rafi, I agree with how he's prioritized pre-K and college and career readiness and teacher salary. I will highlight, Rafi, because you're not looking at it, that it takes us over the $100 million. So we can't do it all. But I definitely agree with you. And as I think about the board goals that are focused on college and career readiness, like that's definitely tied to it. And also just, knowing what I know about pre-K and how that can support just the third grade reading, it can, support students being better in math. I definitely agree with those things. And to, as I mentioned earlier about the teacher salaries, but it's like if we want to prioritize those three things, do we like not invest in it all? Like which one do we kind of cut from? So, just my thoughts.
Anyone else? Ideas? There's no perfect solution or perfect answer in this discussion. I think it's important to just think through what you would prioritize and why. And the importance of this process is to realize like it is really hard when you have just a certain amount of money and you need to meet all of these needs. How do you decide what to actually spend it on and what is your reason behind it, right? Because that's really what is important for a board to understand is why these things have been prioritized. Y si prefieren responder en español, está bien también, podemos traducir.
Or I know some of us might be driving. Do any of the spending options just stick out to anyone? I'll repeat them again. One is pre-K expansion, teacher salaries, facilities upgrade. That's like improving the HVAC systems, college and career readiness, transportation, curriculum and instruction, and family and parent engagement.
I can chime in on the parent and family engagement piece. I would love to have that be a part of the budget, although I know in reality it rarely is to the extent that it probably needs to be. But we'll also just kind of plug the fact that there is parent and family engagement funding out there. And so being able to kind of raise the question of how to better utilize funds that are supposed to be spent on parent and family engagement activities that may not always land in the right buckets.
I think also too, Jessica, as you mentioned, like just that family and parent engagement, it doesn't often, get the attention that it needs. And so I'm thinking, and maybe that could be just from, it being a lack of understanding about how important, like the big factor that, parents play to student success as well. I'm just kind of brainstorming about why it's not getting the attention that it needs.
Yeah, and I'll say too, I think people like even on campus budgets when they're trying to figure out how to use those funds, especially with like Title I, it's a lot of like restrictions or rules or things that you have to know to not get in trouble for misuse. And so sometimes, and I've seen this both with school districts and then also individual campus budgets where they err on the side of let me just not spend it or spend it on things I know for sure are related to parent and family engagement to avoid those issues. But there's so much research that really does speak to the return on investment when parents and families are supported and engaged in helping their children learn.
And just to kind of add on the same theme, just thinking about, I think sometimes districts, or when we're making these budgetary decisions, it's like it might feel like a black and white kind of decision. But to your point, Jessica, about that return on investment, like if we help families understand, and they can be just as invested in their kids and helping to meet those student outcomes that the district is obviously trying to meet for their students. Like it's what we all want. We all want the same thing. We want our students to reach their potential. So I think it can actually all be aligned.
I think also, hi everybody, I'm Laura with the Mayor's Office of Education and Youth Engagement. What's a little bit difficult about this exercise is kind of not going through some of the data where the district is already with these different issues, and then being able to make a more informed decision as to like what are like the more pressing needs as of now, like analyzing like, the access for pre-K, for example, or in terms of facilities upgrade, like we know that that's a huge need. But understanding kind of like the impact of the facilities upgrade on like education or student teacher morale, like that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of things to consider when making these. But I do want to say, and I'm obviously skewed because I mostly work with teens and high school students through the City of Houston Youth Ambassadors, is that college and career readiness does seem to be a very hot topic for them, something that they really feel like they need and they're lacking of. And from conversations in folks in both HISD and Aldina ISD, that's what I'm hearing. But again, I would like to have more more information to make these type of, decisions.
Laura, I love that you brought that up because that's exactly the types of questions that board members should be asking. And many times, and this is across, school districts, many times, a budget is presented and you, as a board member, don't have the data that you need to ensure that you feel confident that these are the right investments. So I love that you brought up that point because that is critical, and it's what board members should be asking for to make sure, okay, how did you arrive at this decision? What data did you use? What is it showing us that our greater needs are? Is this going to get us the impact that we want? And in the interest of time, we weren't able to, like it's a short activity. But I think you bring up a very good and important point that it's what we would want our districts to be doing as they are making these decisions.
Right. Thank you.
Rafi, you had your hand up?
Yes, I do. I was curious, how many people are on this call?
How many are on this call?
Yes, ma'am.
There's about 12 of us.
Okay, so because if there was hundreds of people, I didn't want to take all the time. But let me say that my priorities, as I mentioned, stand as I mentioned them. But looking at these numbers, it seems like if if this is for HISD and if this is for 1 year, and based on the fact that the way the bond issues went this past year, this past bond election, it seems like a priority would have to be the facilities. And then another priority would be the curriculum, because you cannot help pre-K kids and those that are graduating if your curriculum is lacking. So a way to help with pre-K kids is in fact curriculum issues, and that in itself would help pre-K kids. So I found 3 items. So and then the family engagement is also critical. I was a PTA president, and believe me that my children back in the day in A-Leaf school district were treated so well because all the teachers knew that I was a PTA president. So parent engagement and facilities and curriculum, those 3 things would actually go a really long way in what are my priorities, which is pre-K kids and those that are graduating. And for teachers, if you have a leak in your roof, you don't have AC, you don't have heating, it is very difficult to teach your children. So those items actually become an overriding priority based on the budget numbers that I'm looking at.
Thank you, Rafi, for sharing. Yeah, so when you start to think about it, right, you realize that each of these priorities is kind of necessary. So how do you start to make the decisions? If you only have $100 million in the bank to spend on these, you each are bringing up very good points. And our math is adding up to well over 100 million at this point. So how do you start to decide? And maybe you make cuts to just a percentage of each of these buckets of money, right? Instead of saying, well, we're going to cut the entire transportation, or we're going to cut the entire upgrades to facilities, maybe you start to inch away a piece of it. Any thoughts on anything that you would want to cut? Because at this point, I think we've touched on every topic except transportation, but we do need the kids to get to school. So we've got to allocate some money to that.
Yeah, so I don't know. How do we want to, think about this? Do we want to kind of prioritize, the items that we have said are important? It's kind of just like, what are we thinking about as a group would be the best way? Or is it just like, okay, fund what we can, a little bit into everywhere? Or do we want to really be targeted with our investment?
Let me pose a question to the group. Are any of these investments things that could be done by an outside organization for either less money, or maybe the organization themselves are able to pay for those services? Do y'all think that's an option?
Interesting you bring that up, because I actually just had a conversation with my city council member about this very thing, in terms of with the district facing cuts to like cutting the wraparound program, for example, then does the city have programs or funding or resources? But then we look at the city budget and it's like similar situation where there are lots of competing priorities and not enough money. So, I mean, in theory, yeah, I think some of these things could come from community partners, universities, local businesses, but then that would, I think, take a shift in like mindset on a like district side to really do the engagement work necessary to get the funds from other places, because there's lots of money in Houston as a city, but it doesn't always make it to the things that need money.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's the shift in mindset, and then the ability to really create those partnerships. And it is, it is doable. There are districts that are doing those things, and like you said, there's lots of resources in this city, so we've got to find ways to maximize that for sure. Any other thoughts? We've probably got like 1 or 2 minutes left before we need to finalize this budget.
Yeah,
And maybe we won't finalize it tonight, and that's
I
okay.
know. And as a former student who dependent on public transit. I think transportation has always been a challenge for students who live kind of close to the school, but still don't qualify for the bus service just because you're point whatever mile away, you know, from the eligible distance from the school. As I was looking at the budget that we're developing, like pre-K, is that something that could be, you know, a partnership, and maybe we can move some funds from the pre-K expansion to transportation, just because, I mean, families, you know, transportation is a huge need.
I agree. And it's tied to funding too, because I mean, when the kids go to school, you get the money, but I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with parents and teachers even, that for schools where there's not buses or not bus service, it would make a world of difference in terms of those students being able to, one, get to campus to learn. But then you also think about when children are walking to school in the rain or when it's cold and then they're out sick for weeks because I mean, so it's just all sorts of things that if there was probably more of an investment on transportation and making sure that as a low hanging like barrier, if it were removed, it, you know, could make a world of difference in terms of some of the other things that are keeping kids not out of school, and then also keeping kids from being able to access resources and most importantly to learn.
So as y'all can see, these are really tough decisions. So in the interest of time, we're going to school board. We're going to have to schedule another meeting to continue this discussion. We've had a go at it, but I'm gonna pass it over to Jessica to help us kind of debrief this activity.
Yeah, so I feel like we kind of, since it's, you know, small group, we kind of talked through, but I guess the first question of like, what was the biggest trade-off or what was the hardest one to make? So if we had to kind of come to a consensus, if that's even possible, what made this process hard?
Well, what I noticed was, I think like we had Rafi come in and say, hey, like you got pre-K, you got college and career readiness, you got teacher salaries, like those are the things, those are the big three. And then after like kind of like sitting with it for a bit and like thinking, you're like, oh, okay, well, you have like the facilities and you have other things that support those top three that you deem the most important. And so I think like that I noticed that like, okay, well, first glance these are the things, and then even to Laura's point, because that is especially college and career readiness, like students are really like that's kind of like a top thing right now. But then when you kind of like really take your time and break it down, you think like Sandra said, well, the kids have to get to school, and then like how you said, Jessica, well, you need that parent engagement. And so I think you kind of have like your different tiers, I guess, or the things that speak to people. So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's levels, it's layered, and it's highly complex. And I think absent the local data on the needs and impact, it's really hard. And I know sometimes that data isn't always available or current enough to be able to make the best decisions. And so I know in some of our previous CCE conversations, we've just talked about like how there's lags in data. So just thinking about getting the clearest picture possible when trying to, do the budget so that, districts can see what the impact could be based on like even prior years spending. So what else? And so I guess then and I guess the last question, as far as when we think about all of the decisions that we've wrestled with, even in this like short period of time, like what would be the impact on student outcome goals? So if we looked at the budget that we came out with, like what do you all think would, be the difference based on how we made decisions about what to spend?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, in some of those buckets that was very clear, it was like very clearly aligned and more easy to draw that line of like, okay, college and career advisors are going to help with board goal 3. The increasing the teacher salaries and the quality curriculum is going to help with goal 1 and 2. So I think those are kind of easier to see, but we know that the other buckets of money can also impact. So I think back to Laura's point of making sure we have the data, and then making sure that we know how each of those things will impact, and then what amounts do we actually need can help us with those decisions too.
And we, can move on. So as we wrap up, just thinking about next steps, I mean, the budget process for a district, especially the district the size of HISD, is pretty long and involves a lot of different steps. So we are really towards the end now. So the next thing coming up would be on May 22nd. There is a proposed budget review and discussion with the board about, what's in the budget, what, needs to change, what, where those trade-offs will be. And then looking at stakeholder feedback to consider, where they land on the final budget, which will be voted on June 12th. So there's still opportunities to just stay involved and engaged in the process. Ask questions as you have learned from this exercise and things that continue to come out as the budget decision gets closer. And that's really all we have. I mean, just thank you for participating. Thank you for sharing your ideas and offering this invaluable input as we learn more about budgeting. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And we are time, so kudos to us.
Bye, y'all.
That was a
Bye.
good learning experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, ladies.